Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am your host this evening. Jenny, I think is coming. Not really sure. We'll see. It's kind of one of those last minute weeks, or not last minute weeks. It's just been a chaotic week. I think anybody who is a parent of the trans community, who is trans, who has friends in the trans community, there's just every day there seems like there's something new coming out. And so I'm sure there's just a lot of people who feel like it's all a bit too much, right? And tonight we actually wanted to bring to the forefront some people, and we actually brought Pauli Murray to everyone's attention on our show last year. But we wanted to bring forward someone that most people don't know about, who was central to the civil rights movement, whose work was central to the foundation of so many Supreme Court arguments. The fact that we don't know her, the fact that we haven't heard Pauli Murray's name, the fact that it's not a household known like Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King, honestly is astounding. So last year we had presented, information on her, and there is a documentary on Prime, Amazon Prime, that you can watch for free. And I had put a link to the trailer in the comments on LinkedIn, and I believe on YouTube and TikTok, everywhere I place this at. And the name of it is My Name is Pauli Murray. And it's a documentary that there's footage of her. She is doing like commentary within it, talking about her writing her autobiography and her background. And Pauli Murray a was raised or born in Maryland, but her mother died of a cerebral hemorrhage when she was 3, and her father pretty much was considered to have lost his mind, and so she was taken and sent to live with family with her aunts in Durham, North Carolina. I'm only about an hour away from there, and again, I've never heard Pauli Murray's name mentioned in any history book of North Carolina, whether it was college, whether it was high school, middle school, you name it. So Pauli Murray goes to live with her aunts, who really kind of just let her explore who she is. There's not a lot of rules. They are pretty much like, you can be whoever you want to be. Oop. Woohoo! You made
Hey,
it!
people. Sorry, I was hanging out with my parents and it just took me a little minute to get home.
I get it. I get it, girl. I totally get it. My earbuds stopped working right before the show, so I'm
Oh,
not
doesn't
even
that
doing
just
earbuds
figure?
tonight. Right,
Doesn't
right.
that
I'm
just
like, it's
figure?
just right, right. And they were working while I was watching the documentary right before this afternoon, and now they don't. Like, I went to pop them in as like we're starting, and like the earbuds, like they're not picking up. I'm hearing it play out the computer and not my earbuds, so I
Oh,
put that
loud.
away. Right? I said, oh well, forget that. But I kind of was just giving everybody kind of an introduction to Pauli Murray
Love.
and some of her work, but really what I kind of wanted to pull out, and that is what the documentary really pulled out that I guess I didn't get when we shared her information last year, was that her work wasn't just pivotal for the civil rights movement, it was pivotal for women's rights, it was pivotal for gender equality, and she was calling out stuff 20 to 30 years before we were ready to hear it. Even
I
when you
love
talk
it.
about
A rising
segregation.
tide lifts all boats, man. You know, that a lot of people, need to get on board with understanding that queer liberation is liberation for all.
Right? Right?
And she knew
Um,
that.
she did. She did. Who, man, this woman. And I'll go ahead and say, so, because everybody's probably wondering, okay, so this is TransParents, why are we talking about Pauli Murray? So, Pauli Murray was, again, she went to live with her family relatives in North Carolina when she was young. And it very clearly came out, like I said, her aunts did not push her to conform to any kind of gender identity. And eventually her aunt was just like, can I make a deal with you? You can wear pants every day of the week, but not when we go to church on Sunday. Wear a dress on church on Sunday. And Polly agreed to that. And then the aunt, her aunt Pauline, would joke and say, she's my little boy girl or boy child. Dressed again, androgynous, cut her hair, the whole nine yards, and later would express that she felt she had a he/she personality. And from a very early age, like this, I can't even go into all the historical context that this woman absolutely does, but I will try and go through some of this documentary. So again, we do the whole introduction of where she's from. And so she moves because in North Carolina at the time, you could only go through high school to 11th grade if you were black. So her aunt takes her to New York to go enroll and finish high school so that she can continue to pursue education. And one of the first things that she notices when she goes to New York is she can sit anywhere on the subway, which was not something you could do in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And this really kind of strikes her as what is going on here. She was very influenced by the Harlem Renaissance. She becomes friends with Langston Hughes and was going to civil rights talks with Mary Bethune. So again, very very early activism. This is her high school, right? She goes to college. She goes to a women's college, and she's only one of four black women allowed in. And then she applies to UNC because UNC, which is University of North Carolina, has begun to do race studies and teach race studies. And she thought, well, if they're willing to embrace race studies, maybe they're willing to take in women, or actually not women, but someone of my race, right? And so she writes them and she's like, hey, I'd like to be in it. And they pretty much come back in there and go, yeah, the Constitution and our law says that your race can't go here. So she pulls out her typewriter and she writes out about why this is discriminatory and sends it to all the major newspapers, to the NAACP. She sends it to Eleanor Roosevelt, and she sends it to her husband, who is president at the time, Teddy Roosevelt, calling him out. And of course, he really doesn't respond. But her and Eleanor pick up a huge relationship. And Eleanor kind of understood some of these things as being an adopted child, being an avid reader, wanting women's rights, recognizing that there was a difference in gender and how they were treated. And so some of her earliest realizations were not only that white man was being placed over black, right? But that men were being placed over women. So she winds up going to Berkeley instead and getting her master's degree. And then from there, she applies to, let me see, where did she go next? Howard University at Law. She graduates first in her class, and she is the only female. Yet she faces gender discrimination, and she calls it out. This is like I don't even know if this is in 1930s yet. Actually, I think this is 1930s by now. But she in Harvard Law School, I'm sorry, she applies to Harvard Law School and they say, no, you can't come here because of what? Her gender. So she writes again with Eleanor's help and gets in and graduates top of the class. But she calls this denial. And even though she's in the classroom, they won't ever, like, she'll raise her hand, they won't look at her, they won't call on her. They won't give her any attention. Even though when they look at the top of the marks, she's at the top of the class all the way across, they won't let her speak in class. And she terms this gender bias as Jane Crow law.
Mm-hmm.
Which again is just like, what? I haven't heard this. Where is this in the history books?
Right.
Right?
Right.
Right? Okay. So then let's go to the civil rights and the women's rights work. She literally was an influence for Justice Ginsburg. Some of her first arguments, Reed versus Reed, she used and contributed, like put the research down that Pauli Murray's research is what won this. She co-founded the National Organization for Women, now. And in I think it's 62, somewhere around there, JFK is creating what is called the Commission on the Status of Women to look at what? Gender equality. And guess who his buddy is? Eleanor Roosevelt. And Eleanor Roosevelt says, hey, you know someone who you should have on this committee? Pauli Murray. And guess who got on that committee? Pauli Murray. And she went on, so then later in life, she goes on to become like a black female priest. She was the first black female priest to be ordained in the Episcopal Church. And she just, her legacy is beyond the pale. And when I say that, let's just go to some of the accomplishments. So she goes to UNC, or actually she applies. She's denied due to her race. And we skipped this one. I didn't tell you this one. In 1940, years before Rosa Parks refuses to move on a bus, Pauli Murray refuses to move on a bus in Virginia. She and a friend are arrested because they will not move to the segregated section of the bus. The NAACP takes this case, and they're trying to overturn the precedent, right, that says separate but equal. And the judge realizes what's about to happen. So the judge says, you know what, we're not going to say that you refuse to move from your spot. We're just going to say disorderly conduct. So they can't they can't create the precedent to use to tear down the law.
Right.
But this was like 12 or 13 years before Rosa Parks sat on a bus.
Right.
Have you heard about Pauli Murray doing it? No.
Which really brings up, in my opinion, such an interesting point. When queer history is left out of education, history is left out of education. And the fear is that I think, I don't know because I can't relate to these people, but the fear, I guess, is that, well, if we teach it as just queer history, then it puts some kind of emphasis on something like sexuality, which is,
right.
You know, every straight person with a wife or a husband that we learn about, I know what they're doing in their bed at night, right? So
right.
teaching about these queer leaders and these queer rights, movement leaders isn't just about, nobody's talking about what they're doing in bed at night. We're talking about their contributions to our world, to our society, and eliminating it eliminates history. It's no surprise, that a lot of us learned for the first time in recent years that the person that is responsible for a Wi-Fi is a woman. When that movie Hidden Figures came out, these were things that no one taught us. We didn't learn that much even about like the Tuskegee Airmen. We did. Right. It was a blip on a history page, though. It was a picture with a little caption under it. But we're not learning the history that marginalized people have really contributed to our society. And it's curious. Why? Why aren't we learning about that?
Right. I agree. And Lisa, hello. Welcome. And so let's throw up. I'm going to throw up just so y'all can see the background. We're going to play the trailer.
There are some people who now argue that you cannot teach American history without teaching about Pauli Murray.
Pauli was a writer, a lawyer, a priest, a poet. Pauli was a feisty woman.
My name is Pauli Murray. My whole history has been a struggle in a society dominated by the ideas that blacks were inferior to whites and women were inferior to men.
Pauli was way ahead of the times.
I chose for my senior paper, should Plessy versus Ferguson be overruled? My little argument went to the Supreme Court.
Y'all see all of the different folks that are in this room? That is made possible by Pauli Murray.
If you rip away everything, oppression is the business of not respecting one's personhood. For my first 2 years, I was the only woman in the law school. They didn't even let me talk.
Thurgood Marshall is talking about Jim Crow.
And she says, what I'm experiencing is Jane Crow.
Pauli Murray was not just an amazing lawyer or a badass feminist, but also a queer, non-binary person. Sitting in front of Murray's notes, the turmoil and the suffering, this is a feeling I know well. Scholars who have written about Pauli largely still use feminine pronouns. I don't know what pronouns Pauli would say.
Trans and gender non-binary people have always been a part of our American context. So did y'all just think that your generation invented it?
But if this country is to survive, we must live together in harmony.
Pauli may not have realized they would be a beacon for so many folks.
Pauli's time had not come. We have to work for a world in which it does come.
You say I can't, I'll show you I can, even if I die trying.
Okay. Like I said, you can find that on Amazon. That is for free through Amazon Prime. My name is Pauli Murray. And that there are so many pieces to her story. And I'll tell you, I use her. So when we look at her whole entire life, she adopts the name when she goes to Harlem in high school, her senior year. At that point, she adopts the name. She starts putting out poetry in the name of Pauli. And her name is Anna Pauline. And so she had switched it to Pauli, which was a non-gender name, right? And she described herself as her personality was a he/she personality. Over her lifetime, she would beg doctors to give her hormone, testosterone. She spent many times in mental facilities because of the angst she felt with the incongruence of her body. She would beg for them to do x-rays, for them to do tests. At one point, she was convinced that she must have undescended testicles, that she knew they were going to go in and find them, because she just did not fit a female in her eyes. Now, later in their life, Pauli used she, her. And because she went to she, her as an older adult, that is why I'm sticking with she, her. But there are lots of pictures of Pauli's time when, right after high school and college, she is also traveling with at the time, there's about 300,000 different individuals in the U.S. who would hitch trains and go from town to town looking for work. And because of her androgynous features, because of the way she dressed, she would go by Pete. She would go by the vagabond. She would go by the dude. All things that pointed and dressed in pants, dressed in leather jackets, again, could pass. And people would think that she was a young black male and never question it. And I sit here and think about all the times that she would try to express herself and then get shut down from it, and how that must have felt. And so she would just dig in further into, I think, that fired her. That was her momentum to keep pushing into this gender. When we looked at law, when we looked at equality, that's what inspired her to want change for people. And I'm going to read through, this is just a small portion of what she contributed. Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. Murray's arguments against separate but equal helped lay the groundwork for the Supreme Court's decision to end school segregation. Reed versus Reed, 1971. This case marked the first time the Supreme Court struck down a law based on gender discrimination, influenced by Murray's research. Frontiero versus Richardson, 1973. Murray's work contributed to the court's decision to strike down gender-based discrimination in military benefits. DeFunis versus Odegaard, 1974. This case involved affirmative action in university admissions, and Murray's arguments on equal protection were cited. William versus Saxby, 1976. This case involved gender discrimination in federal employment, and Murray's arguments were cited in the decision. Craig versus Boren, 1976 again. This case established the intermediate scrutiny standard for gender discrimination, with Murray's research playing a significant role. Califano versus Goldfarb in 1977. This case challenged gender-based Social Security benefits, and Murray's research played a role in the court's ruling. Schwecker versus Wilson, 1981. This case involved gender discrimination in Social Security benefits, and Murray's arguments were cited in the decision. Meriter Savings Bank versus Vinson, 1986. This case established workplace sexual harassment as a violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, with Murray's work influencing the legal argument. United States versus Virginia, 1996. This case challenged the male-only admissions policy of the Virginia Military Institute, and Murray's research on gender equality was referenced. In 2020, building on Pauli's work, the ACLU won a Supreme Court case prohibiting discriminations against lesbian, gay, and trans people, again based on her work. But we don't know who she is. Why is that? Like, I'm just...
Well, the tendency is to suppress any marginalized voice, and Pauli just makes up so many marginalized voices. And
the
that
buses,
is
like she did the bus like 15 years
right.
prior. She was sitting down at lunch counters 17 years before they were doing that. And saying no, like they pushed Jim Crow out of this one particular, a couple of different places at Howard University around campus that they were letting all white people eat at. And they would go in and just sit down, do sit-ins, and like, nope, we're not leaving. We don't have to eat anything, but we aren't leaving. She did that 17 years before, but we don't hear
people
anything
almost don't want to know those things even happened anymore, because apparently it just makes all the little white boys and girls feel bad. Now, I have 2 white children. They don't seem to have some kind of prevailing guilt. What they do recognize is that they have a responsibility, and that they get to use their voice and they get to use their privilege to, further progress.
Right.
But they don't, but that seems to be, the driving force there is, well, we don't want to teach about that. That makes people feel bad. And thanks so much for your hard work. Now shoo.
Yep. And I think it just was, it's amazing to me that her groundwork is, again, I can't even go into the lengths of what this woman did, from challenging status quo after status quo after status quo, and being like, why are you saying that? Give me your basis.
In the 40s and 50s, that's wild.
And see, in the civil rights movement, so get this, in the civil rights movement, in like the 50s and 60s, you've got people who are kind of like, we're out doing the marching in the streets, and we're like, oh, we're the first people to do that. We coined the civil rights movement. And they're like, and what we didn't realize is no, we didn't. Pauli was doing it 20, 30 years before us, and we didn't even have a clue who she was.
Yeah.
That was amazing to me, to even see them say, we, again, even within our community, we had no clue of her work.
Right. I think it's like a Buddhist parable about, planting a tree that you'll never really get to see grow. You plant these things, you do these things because they're going to benefit what's coming after you. They're going to help the future, and you may never get to see what that means. But it seems like such a dishonor, and I'm sure they wouldn't care about a spotlight or some kind of attention. The important thing to them was the work. But it still seems like such a great disservice to think that 5 years ago the ACLU was using their work to what a legacy.
She was born in 1910 and died in 1985. So literally, she's making all of her beginning college work. She's literally graduating college during the Depression and making these arguments back during the Depression about gender. And we still are arguing about women's rights, in the 50s and 60s? Before we
today?
In 70s?
Right now? Sunday? At this moment? Yes.
I just think it's insane that we have no concept of who this woman is,
right?
Of their work, of their contributions. And again, it's not just, it was kind of like they said, and so I'll add to this. So in 2017, Yale University, she also graduated, that's where she got her doctorate of law, was from Yale University, top of her class. And in 2017, Yale University named a residential college in Pauli's honor. It was the first college named after a person of color, and the first after a person recognized as LGBTQ. And again, that said something huge, huge,
Yeah, that's pretty freaking cool.
right? I'm just amazed, and she made this quote toward and within the documentary. She had lived her life to see her lost causes found,
That's really cool.
and she knew there was still lots of work to do. But the things that had railed her and irritated her as a kid, like she refused to ride the segregated bus, she would walk or ride a bike. She just refused. Like, I'm not complying with that. To finally see some of that now ended, but also knowing that there was still a torch to pass on. But the gender equality that she was laying out was huge. And again, it was in a time where people did not, I mean, I think of my grandmother in the 50s and
Right.
her attitude now, and she would look at Pauli Murray like she was crazy. And she's a white woman.
There are lots of white women who today would still think that's crazy. There are
Right.
lots of white women today who are not grandmothers, who
Nope.
are part of a newer movement of this very traditional gender role, which is fine for anybody who wants to, everybody should get to live however they want to live. But they do, see Pauli's work, your work, my work, as crazy. They think we've missed the mark, and
They do. They do.
so it's not something that's going to go away. It's just like when we
Mm-mm.
talk about racism going away. I wish there was. I don't know if it's just innate in us as human beings to spot visible differences and then make decisions based on that on people. I think that probably is some kind of evolutionary thing, to what's different. We had to be afraid of things that were different. I mean, we're a blip in this timeline as far as being more like modern humans. Before that, I mean, we went through an entire evolutionary process. So I get it. But how many years later, and we're still doing this and we're still fighting this fight. So it is a marathon, and it's going to continue. And this idea that a president's going to save us, or a Supreme Court is going to save us, or one piece of legislation, it's not. This is going to be a longer lasting fight. Rocco, thanks for asking. My work is to help transgender people and parents of transgender people, and to fight for gender equality, to fight for everyone's right to autonomy. So I'm glad I could clear that up for you. Thank you.
So they could live like everybody else.
Just like everybody else.
There's a poem Pauli wrote. Pauli was, again, a poet. And because somebody in the interview says you were a lawyer turned poet, and Pauli corrects them and is like, no, I was a poet turned lawyer.
Yeah.
So this poem is written early college to the oppressors. And to me, this speaks, she was probably speaking at the time of the race movement, but I'm wondering if she was already glimpsing the gender as well within this poem. Now you are strong, and we are but grapes aching with ripeness. Crush us, squeeze from us all the brave life contained in these full skins. But ours is a subtle strength, potent with centuries of yearning, of being kegged and shut away in dark, forgotten places. We shall endure to steal your senses in that lonely twilight of your winter's grief. And there's just something about that poem to me that speaks more to then, it speaks to me of all the fights that she was fighting for, whether it was women's rights, whether it was gender equality, whether it was race. It was that she was always fighting for humanity, to see people as humanity. Because she makes a statement at one of the colleges that she notices that it's not just, and that is where, like, because she was talking about, like, she'd gone to law school to be a civil rights lawyer, and she was like, and then I realized I came out also a feminist.
Yeah.
Because she was realizing the difference not only in how, again, how how black were inferior to white, but she was also watching how women were supposed to be inferior to men, and didn't understand that argument, possibly because they identified as both.
Yeah.
So don't box me in that. And I think that was probably, in ways, some of this, like talking about that equality, the separate but equal. Everybody was always trying to argue about the separation, and she's like, no, the whole premise of it you've gotten wrong. It's that you've missed it. You're not treating everybody equal.
Right. What is equal about separate?
Right?
Where is the equality and separation?
And so
If I
she
am
brought up,
equal
like,
to
she
you,
was the
then
one that
your
laid the basis for
space.
that argument to break
Right.
that down. And again, you're talking about a woman beyond her years as far as pushing for rights that other women at the time most definitely were not pushing. Black women were definitely not pushing. And she just kind of dared to say, no, you aren't going to step in my way. You may have this law that says race isn't for your school, but I'll go to this school. Or my sex, you won't let my gender identity let me go in here, so I'm going to go over here instead. But you damn sure ain't going to stop me. Like, she even went to Ghana and taught. Like, the stuff here in the U.S. became so just crazy in the civil rights movement. She was like, I'm going to go teach over 18 months over in South Africa, or in Africa, in Ghana. And Africa, what she realizes is that the president at the time that she's teaching has come in is a little bit dictatorial. And they start investigating what she's teaching in the classroom because they're worried about her teaching about freedoms and independence that Americans have because she's American, not because she's black, not because she's a woman, and that's how she identified, again,
Interesting.
because that was for safety reasons. I mean, she couldn't have died. And we didn't have the terminology. I mean, you have to think about that. We didn't even have the language of non-binary or transgender when Pauli was going through
And
these
Pauli still
experiences.
knew who Pauli was.
Right?
Pauli knew who
Questioning
Pauli was.
doctors over the years. In fact, when Harvard or whoever it was, I can't remember which, hold on, let me pull up my notes. Whichever school denied her on her sex. Let me see which one. It's funny. Early life. Dun, 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 dun. I think I can't remember if it was Howard. Whichever one denied her on her, actually, it may be Harvard. When Harvard denied her, she wrote back, sir, if there was anything I could do to change my appearance to fit into your, like, I have done everything. And not
Right.
even science is caught up with that yet. Meaning she had gone to doctors. She had already tried to change. She had tried to
Right.
take the hormone replacements. She had asked for surgeries. She had done all this crap. And they were saying, nope, can't do anything. And so she's kind of telling Harvard, well, dude, like, I've done everything but change my sex because I would if I could.
Right.
And it's just like, that is a lot for a woman to realize at that age, in that time period. And again, we didn't have the terminology. But again, there are pictures that she cataloged that she would write in Polly/Pete, or the vagabond, or the dude.
Yeah.
Pauli was naming themselves that. Pauli said that she had a she personality. She knew this. In her bones, she knew it. And there are a lot of people that they talked about later, like other lawyers and people who work with her, who were like, did you ever know? And they were like, no, we didn't know anything about that because she just kept it so close. But then I think about that time period. She saw what happened at Stonewall. And
For
she's
sure.
working on it legally from where she can work with it within her framework. But I mean, she knew she was up against a wall. She was always up against a wall.
I would like to take a moment. You know, part of what we do here on TransParents is, you know, we don't speak from the perspective of trans people. We certainly can't. We do speak from the perspective of parents and from the perspective of allies. And so I do want to highlight a little that the way this is all Pauli, go Pauli, go. But the way that Eleanor Roosevelt stepped up as an ally across racial lines, whether Eleanor Roosevelt knew Pauli to be queer, I don't know.
I don't think so.
But that allyship, when those of us who have that privilege can use it and help get those people in the rooms where they need to be at the tables where they need to be, instead of trying to take some kind of credit for it, instead of trying to white savior it, just to get them in the rooms where they need to be, and to speak on their behalf, because otherwise, and you and I have said this before, otherwise it becomes solely their fight, and they don't get taken seriously. They don't get the attention they need. I think about the posts that I've done on TikTok and the reach I've had, especially recently in about the last month. There are far more knowledgeable, talented, incredible trans creators than me. I'm in awe of them. But I get that reach because of my privilege.
Right.
Because I am straight passing, because I am white, because I am cisgender. I get that. And so there's a weird feeling about it, like this doesn't, so I try not to make it some kind of, oh, this is about me. It's not. It's about this movement. It's about this purpose, and it's about them. But if that's all I
what
have
Pauli
to
was fighting
offer the
for, it's about
situation,
equality. It's about
right?
equality.
And
So that
I
everyone's
have that to offer,
considered.
though. So I offer it and I use it to the best of my ability, which is what Eleanor Roosevelt did. And I'm always on here saying it takes all of us. I am just one person. Amber is just one person. This idea that, oh, well, what's my voice going to matter? I didn't start doing anything thinking I was going to matter. And now I've been able to raise funds for the Oklahoma Equality Law Center, a nice chunk of change. We have to use what we can, and sometimes that is our privilege. And I'm very grateful for the examples of allyship that came before me, so that I can be reminded of how to do that in a way that is respectful and honoring of the people I'm trying to help, and not, it's not about Jenny.
Right. Definitely. I think, and it was amazing how many the allies that she did have within her work. One of them is considered to be her silent partner, and again, this was a day and age where you didn't talk about these things, and so Pauli kept everything. And when Pauli died, all of the research over the years, and honestly, anybody who said that they walked into Pauli's home said that the bookshelves were covered with books, and on top of the books were boxes of folders and research. Just everywhere you looked were books and research and books and research and more research and more research. And she wanted it left to the Salinger's Library. I believe it's the Salinger's Library at Yale, because they hold like some of the largest library of gender, of women's research. And when they started talking about the depths of it and getting into like putting out the biography of her, writing about her after she passed, they were looking at whether or not they put the gender and the sexuality in it. And she had a whole entire box full of all this gender and sexuality research that she had done, again pointing out where it wasn't okay. It wasn't okay that you were being sidelined or questioned because of body parts when you had the intelligence that matched. She just refused to bow down to that. So the library has all that information, and now that is used for all of our civil rights, gender equality, like people have access to this information now to build upon for a movement that really, in a way, Pauli started on their own. My daughter was trans 16. Today, she's so thankful to me, realizing it would have been a huge mistake. That happens. And that's you can as a parent, every parent gets to sit down with their kid and figure out what's best for their kid. I would have offered my child whatever their needs were and not cut off other resources. And typically, again, to be transgender, it's persistency. So if your child wasn't persistent,
Right,
they weren't
then
transgender.
maybe they weren't trans.
So that's okay. But that doesn't mean
I
that
have
we
the
cut
opposite
off care.
story. My son was absolutely miserable trying to live as a girl. And now he is living his best life and he is in college and he is so grateful that I've been supportive and he hasn't made a mistake. So everybody has their story, and thank you for yours.
I think when I look at some of the early, markers with Pauli, like refusing to wear the dress, wearing the pants all week, and they have poses again, like you've got pictures where they're in masculine, they're dressing more masculine. They reference themselves as male. That early is again just it just proves to the point where a lot of people want to say this is a new trend, that this isn't new. This wasn't somebody who was mentally unstable. She had mental health issues, but it was because she couldn't be authentic. She was pushing so that other people could.
It's not psychologically healthy for anyone to be suppressing who they are, to be denying themselves, and to not have some answers, really.
I mean, that's the thing. She went looking for answers, doctor after
Right.
doctor after doctor. She had some exploratory surgery. Again, they didn't find.
Right.
Well, she was hoping they would find, because again, back then we didn't have the research that we know now. We know that there are genetics. We know that there are neurobiological. We know that there are several other ways to determine and figure these things out that unfortunately were not available in Pauli's earlier lifetime that could have benefited Pauli significantly. And can you imagine the work that Pauli might have accomplished had they been supported as their whole selves? 11 Supreme Court cases of a woman we've never heard of.
Right.
And her foundational research used to create those precedents.
A brilliant human being, regardless of gender or race. A brilliant human being.
And it astounds me again that she's from essentially they consider her from North Carolina, because again, she came here at the age of 3 to be raised by her aunts. And the fact that I never heard about her in a North Carolina history book.
Right.
Even just for the civil rights. Like, come on. You're talking about a state with Ku Klux Klan. The South. This is the reason why we were talking, why there were issues. This is the reason why she says in high school, her senior year in high school, going to New York, she can tell a difference between North Carolina, where she had to sit on the bus, and being able to sit where she wants to in New York. Because in the South, things hadn't changed very much, had they? It didn't change for another 20 to 30 years.
And look what it took to enact that change.
Right.
And now today, I would argue that even most people from even the other side don't feel like Pauli should have to sit at the back of a bus.
Nope.
What we know today is like, what? Why would that even be a problem? So imagine where we're going to be at in 50 years. So the upheaval and the reactions to trans folks, to queer folks, I know that one day they're going to look back and say, how ridiculous. What do you mean people couldn't just decide what was right for them in their lives?
Right.
And when it comes to young people, especially, Rocco, we all put our kids in counseling. I mean, we all did, because our kids needed it. We wanted them to understand too. And we wanted to understand. We wanted them to have support in their journey. But ultimately, who my child is who my child is. And it's not mine to decide. And Pauli,
Agree.
and we see so many other, Amber and I have met so many older trans folks who didn't start their transition journey until way, into their lives. And they always knew.
They knew they
They
were having to hide it to fit in, to make other people happy.
to make other
And
people
I think,
happy.
and that's literally what Pauli Murray, they're talking about at the end of her interview. I believe she succumbed. I'm not sure if she's succumbed to pancreatic cancer, but they do mention pancreatic cancer at the end of her life. And so I'm not sure if that was the reason why she died, but she was talking about that when she passed, that she just wanted to see equality,
Yeah.
that human beings treated other people as human beings, that we recognize compassion in one another, regardless of identity, regardless of color of skin.
To see each other's humanity and allow space, create gentleness for the humanity of people. Because anybody who doesn't want to do that, or doesn't, they're going to figure that out. They are going to figure that out. And to love and support them through that and go, whatever you figure out, I'm here and I love you, is really all most of us have to offer. But to have some kind of hope that the figuring it out will be what I want to happen or what society says should happen is just silly.
I think it brings back into, because Brother Charlie, hello, welcome, learn a lot by listening. And Dragon Rider said hi, and 43 is still trying to start. Welcome, Dragon Rider. It's, when I looked at the documentary itself, listening to Polly talk about all these movements and seeing how in law school, right, trying to argue separate but equal, and everybody is because of the gender, not trying to hear Polly, right? Or whether it was a school saying, I'm not going to hear you because of your race. And Polly was just like, I don't understand, why is there a push? Why can't everybody's voices be heard? And I think that is it makes me think of where we are at this very moment in history, and how we're trying to roll back precedents and court cases that have held longstanding, because one color and one sex consider other colors and other sexes inferior.
That's really what it comes down to. And that fear of losing that status,
Power.
that power.
Power and control.
It's really amazing. I'm very interested in the psychology of that. I find it very fascinating. But I think that it's hard to relate to, because when you've been, and I recognize my privilege and power as a woman, because as a white woman, I still have more status, more power, more resources. It just is. That's just how it is.
Right.
But still less than cisgender white men. So I've always kind of navigated life in that understanding that it's just not there.
Right. I
And so it's
definitely, growing
hard
up in
to
the
hard
South,
to
I definitely
think,
felt that. Like, we were told, you're not,
right.
sorry.
You're not.
That's
You're
not your
not
place.
do this. And so it's hard to relate to that fear of losing that power. Um it's just difficult to relate to.
It's difficult for a lot of people to relate to. And honestly, I wanted to cover Polly. I knew that we had talked about her last year, and I knew that we had discussed some of the same things that we were bringing forward tonight. But I think when we're talking about a country currently that is looking at a lot of executive orders that are discussing gender identity
Right.
and sexuality, I really thought this was a good thing to kind of come back to. For those of you who will be coming next week and who might have heard this week, Stonewall Monument removed the T, and a few hours later, the Q and the plus from their website.
Jesus.
And that's going to be an interesting conversation because next week we actually have someone coming from Stonewall National Archives Museum and Library to get their thoughts on how the monument removed the T and the Q and the plus. So that's a timely conversation that we're going to be having next week for you guys who will be attending. Because I just think that again, we're bringing things that we're like, no, we already established this. And now we're trying to roll it back. And everybody's kind of going, whoa, hold on. Like Roe versus Wade. Remember women, how we all thought we were okay? EMTALA covered us at the emergency room since Reagan. Nope, not anymore. There's my gender rights being taken.
Yeah. I mean, what state are you safe to travel in? You know, if you're a pregnant woman, that's a scary thought.
Papers.
That's a very scary thought.
It's not odd. We see cycles in history, right? And we've seen this cycle before. And I don't want to return to that cycle that was before I was born.
Well, we're here whether we like it or not. And the best that we can do is to show up and continue this.
Not be quiet, not be silent.
And not be quiet, not be silent. You know, if we have to pick up the torch that those before us passed on, then we pick it up and we start running.
Yep.
Boldly in the direction of what is right.
I mean, I think that was supposed to be the point, right?
Ideally, you know, it's disheartening to see, and we've talked about this before, you know, there is a subset of the LGB community who does not want the T you know, in the alphabet. It's kind of a you know, they see it as a separation between sexuality and gender identity. And people like Pauli, people like Marsha P. Johnson, who paved this path, who fought, who died for their lesbian, gay, and bisexual siblings. And to have that effort, they never excluded them. They didn't want them excluded.
Right.
You know, it's sad.
Right.
But, you know, it just takes more of us picking up that torch.
Brother Charlie puts up here, I understand totally why our temple doesn't play games. We are all cosmic connected, period. And I mean, that's kind of what Pauli was kind of getting at, that we're all people. And why couldn't people see that, right? So just like you were talking about the LGBT groups that are now trying to say that T doesn't exist, right?
Right.
Pauli, during their lifetime, was also someone who when she went to, I can't remember which campus she was, I think it's Brandis that she was teaching at, and she was doing race studies, and she always referred to the population as Negro. And in the 60s, the students that were coming in were not okay with this terminology, because she's talking about how there should be equal status and all this stuff, and then she keeps going back to the word Negro and how much this bothered them. And at the same time, you have the Black Panther Party who's coming up about Black people, right? And she didn't like, and it's funny because she felt like she had more humanity by changing the word Negro to a capital N, right?
Okay.
She took her identity by putting the capital N on it. So she didn't want to identify with Black people like the Black Panther Party, because at that time they were going by the lowercase b.
Gotcha.
And she didn't like that. And now I'm looking at it, now we use Black community as the capital B.
Capital B. Yeah.
And if she would be looking at that like this was progress from where she was at, right? Because that was that was a framing for her. Like, it was really hard to get out of that.
I hear that. I always, you wonder, we
covered that topic. Hold on, Rocco. We covered that topic. Go back and look at sports.
Yeah, we have covered that topic, and we broke down some great data and great peer-reviewed evidence, and feel free to find it.
Your bias is showing, by the way, Rocco. Just so you know.
I mean, really? No kidding.
You obviously weren't paying attention to any of the conversation.
None.
Zero. Zip. And
there's all these
honestly,
opportunities to learn, and education is just a really beautiful thing, but it does require getting outside of just what you're personally fed and just what you've bought into. It can be really, really uncomfortable, and it can challenge points and beliefs. And if you're not open to that, then it's not really going to work anyway. You just have to be willing to learn something that might make you uncomfortable.
Right. I think that's where we're at right now, is we've come to a place where everybody decided that we want to roll back to the 1950s, where what was uncomfortable, you don't want to talk about anymore. And you'll just prefer to stick your head in the sand. And I'm sorry, we're not rolling back.
No.
I'm not going back to the kitchen. I'm not my grandmother.
Right.
And you sure the hell won't tell my kid where they go either.
There's a lot of great science out there. There's a lot of great information. And it doesn't have to be through us. There's a wealth of resources to learn more about this and to understand, that
here's one for you that you can find, and he's on YouTube, and there's his name right there. He's a neuroendocrinologist from Stanford University. You can go check out his research. Might help you some.
Nobody wants those things, Rocco. To say that supporting trans people like we do is to say that we want that. It's just a false argument, and nobody wants that. We're all afraid of predatory men. We have all always been afraid of predatory men. And when we tried to tell you men that, all you said was not all men. So, you're just going to have to come to the table with something different. And you're not going to be able to come to the table with anything different until you're willing to learn.
I'm afraid for your child, to be honest.
I mean, I wish him the best. That's for sure.
Yeah. Right. So I don't know. Like, I really, like I said, the link should be on LinkedIn, and I do believe I put on YouTube for the actual trailer. And again, you can find that on Amazon Prime. And I would encourage anyone who has not heard of Pauli, please go check it out, because you will learn a wealth of information that we don't know. We don't know.
I hate to end on
that
a
if we don't talk
note.
about our history, we don't know these things. And then we suddenly come out with the excuse, or actually with the misinformation, that something is new that has been around.
That's been around. And I hate to end on a negative note, but I do want to bring this up. There was a young trans man who I'm sure Rocco would consider a woman, who was just unalived in New York. And it was by 3 adult men and 1 19-year-old girl. Our children are in far more danger of being pummeled than your child is. Now, your child is still in danger of being pummeled by a cis white men, because that's who does all this shit. But just throwing it out there that our children are the ones in danger. They're the ones getting assaulted. They're the ones in danger if they go into a certain bathroom. Your child is fine.
They're being targeted. They're being lured.
Our kids are targeted. So keep that in mind as you try to take on some victim status or assign some to your kid, that what you're afraid of, A, is predatory men. We all are. And B, you're missing the plot. You're missing the plot. So that's all I have to say. Well, I love y'all so much. Another great night, great show. And I did not get to watch the documentary because of how my weekend went, but I can't wait to watch it.
Okay, now, before we leave, next week I've already mentioned that we are having someone from Stonewall come on from the National Archive to talk with us more. But I wanted to point out, we're not exactly sure when we're going to do it yet, but Jenny and I may do an impromptu episode in the middle of the week talking more about Sam and about hate crimes and the status of hate crimes in the U.S.
I do hope that we are able to get Mr. Chris on for that, because he is just such a fantastic young man. I think he's 39. But boy, he looks like a baby, doesn't he? Bless his beautiful heart.
Looks like a baby. Which I think it kind of looked that way till I was about 35, and then it just quickly we went from baby to mature.
Right. Like, where did these wrinkles come from? What is this?
Yes, Derek, yes. Robert, I am so excited to have Robert. As soon as I reached out, and this was before the whole Stonewall announcement this week on the monument, like I had already reached out to him and been like, hey, during the month of, Black History, like I really want to talk about Marsha P. Johnson again. I want to talk about Stonewall again. And so he had already agreed to come on. And now with this latest, we're definitely going to be diving into some of that next week and seeing what his thoughts are on this latest development and what it means. But we're not going away. We're not going to be quiet. That's how it is. Yeah. So with that being said, guys, we're going to leave y'all with that. Please have a fantastic week as you start off. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, as long as they're polite. And we will catch you later on. Like I said, we're not really sure what day. It just may be we go live. I'm not really sure what we're going to do with that one, but it is something we want to talk about. But at the same time, I did not want to move next week's guest either. So I think we're going to have like an impromptu conversation this week once we kind of have some acknowledgement from Mr. Chris, hopefully, that he can join us for that conversation. So with that being said, thank y'all for joining us this week. We will see you next week. Have a great one. Bye.
Love. Bye.